You're watching us live from Banjul, and this is the news at 2000 hours from the Gambia radio and television services with me, Fatmata Sise. And in our top stories, leaders of Coalition 2016 join thousands of jubilant Gambians to mark the first anniversary of the historic election victory. And Vice President Fatoumata Jallow Tambajang attends the 5th African Union and the European Summit in Abidjan. And Africa's oldest liberation movement, the ANC, prepares to choose a new leader amid infighting within the party. And also a U.S. Africa Command denies accusations that it has killed civilians in air raids targeting Al-Shabaab militants. Well, these plus other stories will come up in just a moment. Just stay tuned. And thousands of coalition supporters stormed the Bovo Zone to celebrate the anniversary of the coalition of 8 political parties led by Adama Barrow, who won the December 1st presidential elections. The election was the most tightly fought contest in the Gambia's first democratic change of government through the ballot box. And leaders of the political parties were all represented at the event, with a notable who conspicuous by his absence. Modu Jallow reports.
The momentum had been building since early afternoon, ahead of the much anticipated celebrations marking the anniversary of the coalition government at the Bovo Zone Arena. This place has become somewhat a political battleground for the different political forces who use the iconic arena to project numbers. It was filled with coalition supporters as thousands turned out to celebrate the anniversary of the victory that shocked the world when a relatively unknown businessman defeated the quasi-military government of former President Jammeh. President Barrow arrived to a thunderous welcome, greeted by the Vice President and coalition stakeholders who had arrived hours earlier. The crowds were addressed by various speakers who recalled the enormous sacrifices and compromises that had to be made to salvage the country from what they called the jaws of dictatorship that had ruled the country for more than 2 decades. Coalition leaders, with the notable exception of Honorable Halifa Sallah, who was conspicuous by his absence, reaffirmed their commitment to the coalition government under the leadership of Adama Barrow and urged Gambians to continue their support for him. They also promised that the coalition government will continue its work of improving the lives of Gambians by providing the critical infrastructure and services to move this country forward. Also speaking at the celebrations, President Barrow described the day as truly historic, as it marked the end of an era and the beginning of a new one, which holds great prospects for the country and its people. He used the opportunity to deliver a policy speech outlining his government's achievements and intentions, which he argues is a demonstration of the coalition government's commitment to the values of democracy, development, and reconciliation.
Because of our determination, we are witnessing the beginning of a new and unfolding democracy based on justice, freedom, equality, and fraternity.
He also said that significant progress has been made in institution reforms in the crucial sectors of the economy, judiciary, and security services.
There has been a rise in bilateral and multilateral cooperation as partners have regained confidence to engage the government. This is reflected, among other things, in increased economic activities as a result of conducive business environment created by this government, leading to the stability of prices of basic commodities, which are in fact generally going down. Furthermore, we have a government reduced the price of fuel 3 times in less than 1 year, in line with world market prices.
The President also challenged the youth to play a more productive role in national development and pledged his government's support to youth and women's empowerment.
I am proud to announce that our National Development Plan 2018-2021 has now been validated. This plan has, among other things, mainstream youth development, gender and poverty reduction, as well as sound fiscal and micromanagement policies with the tendency to grow the economy and create decent jobs for our unemployed youths and women.
The celebrations lasted into the evening and for once re-energized supporters that a year into the historic victory, the Grand Coalition is still holding and standing strong despite showing cracks and disagreements among the different constituent parties. The leaders and supporters can only hope that it stays together for the long term to enable it to achieve its promise of socio-economic development. Modu Jallow, GRTS News.
And the 5th African Union and the European Summit ended in Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire, And the Vice President, Mrs. Fatoumata Jallow Tambajang, headed the Gambian delegation that attended the summit. The summit brought together EU and African leaders to define the future direction for cooperation between the two continents. A joint declaration outlining common priorities for the EU-Africa partnership in 4 strategic areas were adopted. These include economic opportunities for youth, peace and security, mobility and migration, and cooperation on governance. Issa Jallow was at the summit and files in this report.
The summit also availed the Gambia opportunities to engage other countries in bilateral talks. The Vice President, Mrs. Fatoumata Jallow Tambajang, met several African and European leaders and the President of the African Development Bank, Mr. Akinwumi Adesina. The Vice President was accompanied to the ADB headquarters by the Gambia's ambassador to the EU, Mrs. Tenengba Jete, and the Foreign Minister, Usainu Dabo.
Hopefully, in the next couple of days, we'll be getting a high-powered delegation from the ADB to visit the Gambia to come and look into our energy sector. And and also there are indications of very budget support for us. So I think these are very, very fruitful and beneficial discussions that we have with the ADB.
At the summit, African and EU leaders focused on investing in youth, a key priority for Africa and the EU, as 60% of the African population is under the age of 25. The new EU External Investment Plan intends to trigger a €44 billion investment in Africa by 2020, thereby creating new job opportunities for young people across the African continent. EU and African leaders agreed to support the mobility of students, staff and academics across the African continent and agreed to enhance exchange programs between Africa and Europe. Leaders also discussed how to tackle migrant smuggling and how to address jointly the root causes of irregular migration. The situation in Libya was scrutinized, and EU and African leaders committed to work together to end the inhumane treatment of migrants and refugees in Libya. They adopted a joint statement calling for international cooperation to fight the perpetrator of such crimes inside and outside Libya and to bring them to justice.
The horrible and horrendous things that are happening in Libya has met the condemnation of everyone, of all delegates that attended the summit. All of them are in unison that what is taking place in Libya today is unacceptable, and that the Libyan authorities must take the necessary steps to bring an end to this very horrible and disgraceful act.
Mr. Dabo also said the King of Morocco has offered means of transportation for the stranded migrants to be repatriated to their countries. At a press conference held at the end of the summit, President Alpha Condé said the discussions were difficult and frank, and that the leaders accepted shared responsibilities of the migration crisis. He recalled that previous promises were never fulfilled and hoped that would not be repeated. President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, called on UN sanctions to be imposed on human smugglers and traffickers. He warned that the agreements will not be effective if leaders do not ensure that the people caught up in Libya and elsewhere can return safely to their homes. The EU agreed to establish a joint migration task force with the African Union and the United Nations aimed at saving and protecting lives of migrants and refugees, in particular in Libya, accelerate assisted voluntary returns to countries of origin, and speed up the resettlement of those in need of international protection. Issa Jallow for GRTS News.
And the National Assembly members, civil rights activists and other government officials have taken part in a pre-2018 budget breakfast meeting. And the program was organized by Bekanyan Kafo and Gambia participants under the sponsorship of the International Republican Institute. Chen Silver tells us more.
Happening barely a few days before the 2018 national budget will scrutinized by deputies, the breakfast session created understanding among participants, especially the members of parliament, of the budget priorities.
It's a lobbying platform for us to lobby you, our members of the National Assembly, honorable members, to see how best we can prioritize the needs of the Gambian people. We've seen in the past that we had budgets whereby it does not really reflect, to our own understanding, the wishes of the Gambian people.
Budget is the second most important document after the Constitution. And then it is right for every concerned Gambian to know what is captured in the budget.
Madi Jobate, a participant, challenged National Assembly members to put government to task and ensure the money spent is used for their intended purpose. Mr. Jobate, who cited certain irregularities of the previous government for crippling the state coffers, said such actions should be discouraged in totality.
To put it very bluntly, budget is a life and death issue. Budget is a life and death issue. As I said, somebody is dying in Serakunda Hospital from preventable disease because resources are not available. And those resources is about this budget. So National Assembly members have a huge task in their hands.
The National Assembly member for Woolly West, Honorable Sidia Jatta, also used the session to add his voice on the significance of national budgets. Honorable Jatta enjoined government to invest heavily in the income-generating sectors such as agriculture and fisheries instead of depending on loans, which he added will not be helpful to the economy.
How do we move the economy of the country? If we inject into the productive sectors of the economy in such a way that you create employment, you create revenue generating capacity of the country, then you can talk about you can even do without taxes. Gambia needs to develop its drivers for us to do away with all these loans and grants. They have never developed any country in the world. In fact, they deter development.
The organizers will proceed with similar activities in many parts of the region by organizing talk shows on community radio stations as a means of informing the populace about how their monies are being spent. Etienne Silva, GRTS News.
And the GSM company Comium is giving out financial packages to winners of its newly launched promotion for its customers. By Ibrahim Chamas more on the latest presentation.
Token of appreciation, Comium, the GSM giant, has geared up to its latest promotion called the GRTS, a way of giving back to its loyal customers. Recharging as low as $100 automatically qualifies you to be part of the raffle draw happening every 2 weeks, in which 10 lucky winners receive $10,000 each.
Come 2018, Comium will do greater things, and Comium will always make our subscribers smile and will always make them happy. Just to brief you about the promotion, the GRTS promotion is a token of appreciation to all our loyal subscribers, to tell them that we are very grateful and we are very thankful. How can someone become a lucky winner? All you need to do is recharge a minimum of $100 every 2 weeks. You can even accumulate. You can recharge 25 today, tomorrow you recharge 25, that's 50 for the first week. Then the second week you can recharge another 25, making it 50, 100. So anytime that you recharge $100, you have an entry into the draw. It's very simple. Just recharge a minimum of $100 or more in order to qualify for the draw. And every 2 weeks, we will do a live draw on GRTS and Paradise FM after the 8 p.m. news. And any number that is drawn, that individual will receive $10,000 from Comium.
The presentation of the first batch of winners was held at the Comium headquarters, Caraba Avenue, where smiles were put on each of the winners' faces after receiving the $10,000 for just recharging as low as $100 credit. One of the lucky winners of the GRTS promotion, Alaji Tamba, who urged the general public to jump on board and seize the opportunity to be part of the countless gifts Comium ushers to its customers. Lamin Marong mentioned that he uses Comium for his daily work routines and the cheap rates of international calls. As the next draw is slated on the 8th of December, another $100,000 will be given to its loyal subscribers by the GRTS promotion. For GRTS News, I'm by Ibrahim Cham.
Welcome back. We'll now take a look at some sports news where participants drawn from 9 West African states in the Gambia for the second edition of the ECOWAS Para Sports Championship. Modu Lamin Sane was at the opening ceremony and filed in this report.
Solidarity March Past by members of the Paralympic fraternity forms part of activities marking the opening ceremony of the ECOWAS Parasports Championship. The second edition is being hosted by the Gambia, with participants drawn from 9 countries from the region.
So today is a day, it's emotional, but at the end of the day, it is a day of celebration. It is a day of coming together. It's a day of showing solidarity. It's a day that we all show that it is unique, not only for the disabled people, but for every human being and every soul on the earth. We're just paving the way, like I always say, that for us, we know our status. But what about those who don't know their status out there? We're creating the enabling environment conducive for all of us to at least participate and showcase our potential and ability.
The procession took the delegation to the Friendship Hostel, where they were addressed by government officials and organizers of the event.
As a result of the stigma associated with disability, persons with disabilities are generally excluded from education, employment, and community life, which deprives them of opportunities essential to their social development, health, and well-being. In some societies, persons with disabilities are considered dependent and seen as incapable, thus fostering inactivity, which often causes individuals with physical disabilities to experience restricted mobility beyond the course of their disability. The UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which the Gambia is a signatory to, is the first legally binding international instrument to address the rights of persons with disabilities and sports. Article 30 of the Convention addresses both mainstream and disability-specific sports and stipulates that state parties shall take appropriate measures to encourage and promote the participation to the fullest extent possible of persons with disabilities in mainstream sporting activities at all levels.
The days of celebrations will also coincide with the event marking the International Day for Persons Living with Disabilities.
International Day of Persons with Disabilities is observed in various ways. The Gambia National Paralympic Committee, as a member of the Gambia Federation of the Disabled, choose to use sports to tackle social issues with a sub-team, Parasports for Inclusive Development. The unique ability of sports to transcend linguistic, cultural, and social barriers makes it an excellent platform for strategies of inclusion and adaptation.
These participants representing their respective countries will compete in various events such as wheelchair middle distance race and basketball. For GRTS Sports, this is Modlamin Sane.
Welcome back, and preparations are underway for South Africa's ruling party's National Congress, and the meetings will see the ANC picking a new leader, and traditionally the person becomes the country's next president. But the ruling party's current focus on electioneering and campaigning means several major decisions have been put on hold at government departments across the board. CGTN's Yolisa Nyamela has more.
Runners to replace Jacob Zuma as ANC leader are his deputy, Cyril Ramaphosa, and Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. Dlamini Zuma is the former chairperson of the African Union Commission. She's also Zuma's ex-wife. Ramaphosa has stressed the need to reignite growth and restore investor confidence, while Dlamini Zuma has called for the nation's wealth to be more equitably distributed. This elective conference is by far the most hotly contested in the ANC. Outgoing ANC President Jacob Zuma attributes it to what he calls maturing of democracy, while some political analysts are saying it's merely a lack of unity within the organization. Especially with what has been happening in the ruling party lately. Some of the ruling party's provincial elective conferences have been marred by violence, and a number of ANC provincial leaders have been killed in the run-up to the conference.
When you see issues being settled in the streets by way of political violence, when you see the level of hatred between ANC factions and actors, that shows you that the internal rules of the ANC are failing to nurture a true democracy where political actors should submit themselves for office or should be allowed to exercise their will without interference or coercion or being violated.
Amid fears that the ANC's electoral conference could collapse because of infighting, the race to succeed President Jacob Zuma has now affected government departments. Many decisions have essentially been put on hold.
Under normal circumstances and in proper democracies, the process of making policies and delivering on policy obligations should not be stopped by elections, because elections are concerned, it's mainly political elites who should be contesting and not necessarily the bureaucrats who are the professionals and whose major obligation is to make sure that government operates and functions smoothly. However, the challenge now that we see is that there is deeper realignment of political camps within the ANC, and these camps implicate the major bureaucrats in government institutions.
The worst has happened in South Africa. We do have a state capture that is not being fully investigated. We are seeing allegations of corruption doing the rounds. I don't think it could actually get worse. The reality is that South Africa's politics is in paralysis currently.
It's hoped that all will simmer down after the conference. The elective conference will be held on the 16th to the 20th of December. Yolisan Jamila, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Let's head to the United States, because the country has been investigating the death during one of its raids in Somalia, and at least 10 people were killed in a U.S. raid. The Somali government wants compensation for the victims, but the U.S. Africa Command now says those who died were not civilians. Instead, it's referring to them as enemy combatants. CGTN's Abdul Aziz Bilo has more from Mogadishu.
U.S. investigators have concluded no wrongdoing on their part during an August raid on a rural village outside Mogadishu that killed 10 Somali civilians. Instead, the brief statement by the U.S. Africa Command referred to the victims as enemy combatants. Mogadishu is yet to offer any public statement, despite promising a public investigation. Experts say the latest U.S. denial will likely to hamper the ongoing fight against terrorist groups.
It will derail the trust that the people have, the Americans and other allies with the Somali government, because the government stands in the feet of the Somali support. If the government doesn't get support of the society, the international partners will not help with that much.
The incident sparked a national debate, with families refusing to bury the dead for days. The attack also reignited the issue of civilian casualties and raised serious concerns regarding Mogadishu's cooperation with Washington in crushing armed groups in the country. According to 8 groups, close to 10,000 Somalis have fled the latest U.S. strikes. Washington has so far conducted 30 aerial strikes this year against militant targets in south-central Somalia and the Puntland region.
It will have impact of Al-Shabaab's recruitment method. It could be the recruitment method, where they found that this is very easy to recruit people, saying, hang on, if you were not listening to us before, now you should listen to us, because Americans will kill you, Somali government will kill you, and they will say we killed Al-Shabaab. So why don't you listen to us? Now people will have a soft ears for Al-Shabaab, saying, you were right, you were very right.
Top U.S. officials claim that these aerial attacks are carried out in support of federal government. But the latest attacks are seen just months after U.S. President granted the U.S. military broader authority to carry out strikes in Somalia against Al-Shabaab and pro-ISIL militants in the north of the country. Somali officials say that they enjoy close cooperation with their allies in countering terrorism. And as hundreds of militants continue to flee the air and land offensive that's currently being mounted, questions are being raised regarding the current approach and whether Washington needs to change its approach if it seeks to gain public trust in its fight against the militant groups. Abdul Aziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu.
And that wraps up this edition of the News at 8. But before we go, a recap of the top stories once again. Leaders of Coalition 2016 have joined thousands of jubilant Gambians to mark the first anniversary of the historic election victory. And Vice President Fatoumata Jallow Tambajang has attended the 5th African Union and European Summit in Abidjan. And Africa's oldest liberation movement, the ANC, is preparing to choose a new leader amid infighting within the party. And also a U.S. Africa Command has denied accusations that it has killed civilians in air raids targeting Al-Shabaab militants. And that was all in this edition of the News at 8 with me, Fatoumata Sise. Thank you for joining us, but I'll be back in the studios at 2200 hours with more news. Until then, stay tuned.